Hello, this is Rusty Gaylord, and welcome to Fork in the Road. This is a conversation with interesting and inspiring leaders in the world who are leaders for others, but leaders in their own life, and who take advantage of opportunities that come their way and choices they can make, all of those different forks in the road to craft a life that is interesting and rewarding to them. Today, I am happy to have Alec Kassin with us. Alec is formerly a LinkedIn employee. He was a mindfulness ambassador there, which I think was fascinating. And he's just got a really interesting story about where he's been and where he is now. So I'm super happy to have Alec with us today. Welcome, Alec.
Thanks so much, Rusty. Good to be here.
Awesome. Well, hey, we were chatting just before we went live here, and you were talking about something, an experience in your life being a blessing in disguise. And I want to jump into a part of your past story that you've described in a very similar way, which was when you were younger and you were really into cycling and you were a semi-pro cyclist and really doing very well. And then you had a ruptured disc and how that really transformed your life. So I'd love you to just walk us through, how did you navigate that situation and where did that take you?
Yeah, happy to go into it. I think we all have times in our lives where, we have a dream that is just taken away from us. And at the time, it's the worst thing ever. And we don't have the benefit of hindsight then to see the benefit it provides you. And so I'll take you back to the time in my life. So I was 18 years old and I wanted to be a professional cyclist. I was part of a junior development team. I had been doing pretty well, both road and mountain bike. And the summer of my freshman year in college, I was so focused on cycling. It was like, eat, sleep, breathe cycling. I was doing the academics. I was engaged in that, but my life was really about cycling. And I had these big races coming up in the summer and I was training all year for them with this focus. And all of a sudden I'm out on this training ride and I feel this pop in my back. And all of a sudden it was like this crippling pain going laterally across my back. And at first I was like, what the heck is this? And I got home and the pain was so bad, I actually couldn't bend over. I had to keep my back straight. And I visited a chiropractor and they said, 2 weeks, you'll be back on top. 2 weeks turns into 2 months, into 4 months, into 6. I see the entire season pass me by. And I'm not getting any better. I'm actually getting worse. And it wasn't until about 6 months later that I was diagnosed with a ruptured spinal disc, which effectively put my cycling career in jeopardy, and it would eventually end it. And moreover, though, it took me to a really depressing place. I had to withdraw from college. I found myself really depressed. Like like if you have something that's so tied into your identity, like cycling was for me, it's really hard when that's taken away. And as an 18-year-old, I had a lot of trouble processing that. And so it left me in this place of, without my identity, I was out of school and I was in a lot of pain. And I was wondering, is this going to be the entirety of my life? And thankfully, thanks to my parents, their love, their care, their support, I was able to find a treatment that worked for me, found a physical therapist who taught me not to fear my pain. And slowly, little by little, I started to get better. Remembering like the first time that I was able to drive in a car without pain, to go to dinner, to see friends for the first time, being able to go back to school. And when all of these things were like reintroduced into my life, they were just such blessings. I didn't take, walking through campus for granted, or being able to sit in a lecture without pain for granted anymore. And even to this day, over a decade later, it's something that I look back on, and it led me into such a beautiful place of like my personal mission. It is the foundation of my personal mission, which is to help people move their minds from foe to friend. Because in that challenge, my mind was my enemy, essentially. And so that's what I mean in terms of a blessing in disguise. Couldn't see it at the time, but it's the reason that we're talking today.
Yeah, well, it certainly is the reason we're talking today. I think quite literally, because it's one of the things that you mentioned in your LinkedIn profile, which caught my eye. I was like, this is a guy I want to talk to. I'm curious though, you said that you didn't recognize this at the time. Let me back up one second. You said, first of all, that when you can, if you lose something that's really closely tied to your identity, it's a huge challenge. And so now you see the benefit of having to actually work through that and recognize that you're bigger than this thing that felt like it was a big part of your identity. You're more than that. But at the time, you didn't necessarily see it. So how did you navigate this emotional time, right? This like psychologically at that moment in time, because it was a big part of your identity. You described the season slipping away, the pain, like all of that. Was there any glimmer of hope in any of that? Or was it just kind of, how do I get through this?
Yeah, it was, overall, it was a lesson in how to deal with really challenging situation. And the way that I think about it is, for a while, I saw life happening to me as opposed to for me, right? It's like this injury was happening to me. And it was kind of like this victim attitude. And don't get me wrong, I was on painkillers. I was bedridden for a time because I couldn't do anything that was, couldn't do activity for more than a little bit of time. And emotionally, I think the hardest part for me was watching, the world continue to turn and to go by, and to have the hard realization that I'm not the center of the universe. And there, for an 18-year-old who is kind of 18-year-old only child that was a bit wrapped up, it was a tough lesson to learn. But the glimmers of hope came, I think, from, I think of my parents who, we had been to a number of, like, if you name a health practitioner, we were essentially there, physical therapist, specialist, acupuncturist, like name them all, chiropractor. And I remember after one of the times, got back from, I'd seen some specialist who at first was like, yeah, I can absolutely help you. And then, 2 sessions later, it's like, well, I've kind of done all I could. And I was really dejected. And I had a chat with my dad, who said, we're going to keep trying until we find the one that gets it right. And that's essentially what happened. And so the glimmer of hope, I think, was the love that I was surrounded by during that time. And the love that, some of my really good friends who, drove over to my house, hour and a half away in order to spend some time with me, my parents that just provided that love and support. And so that's really what kept me going in that dark place.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because I know from my own experience, having people in your life who want the best for you, who love you in this way that you can feel it, like you feel supported by them. It really enabled me to navigate very difficult times in my life. And the benefit of that then is it becomes a platform for which you don't have to just navigate the difficult stuff. You can choose to tackle things that matter to you and tolerate the risk, because it's like, well, I've survived this really difficult thing. Therefore, if I go do this thing that I really want, yes, there's some risk inherent in it, but I'm going to be okay. You build that knowledge because you've been through something hard, and you can translate that forward. And you also still have that platform of support. I know in your life, you've made some of those decisions, those kind of courageous decisions to go forward and do something that you want. This may not be the biggest of them, but I'm curious about if that was an element in you becoming a mindfulness ambassador at LinkedIn. I mean, because first of all, as someone who spent all my whole career in the corporate world up until becoming a coach, there were no mindfulness ambassadors that I was aware of in the corporate world. So how did you create that, and how did you come into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really started with this experience, and through, I say back injury, but there were a lot of different layers to it. I discovered a lot about, the mind-body connection, and how, pain that we think is purely physical, there's also these mental components to it. And that was a big part of how I got better. And once I did achieve that, once I became pain-free, and I'm happy to say my back is pain-free today, I had that element that you just mentioned, that love, and this element of service as well. Like, I would carry around, I had a book that really helped me and changed my life, by Dr. John Sarno, if anybody's out there who has back pain. I had this book that was essentially my Bible, that if I came across somebody that was in pain, they talked about back pain, I'd pull it out of my backpack and I would give it to them. And have my name inside the cover, and it said, hey, this sounded crazy when I read it at first as well. If you have questions, like, send me a text message, send me an email. I'd love to talk to you about it. So that, I think that element of service and that desire for service came from that experience. And at the same time, it kind of planted this seed that wouldn't germinate for a few years, but when it did, it really burst forward. And what I mean by that is, so I went back to school after my injury and graduated as an American Studies major with a minor in public policy. And ironically and strangely enough, one of those kind of, the universe providing for you, I got a message from a LinkedIn recruiter to be part of a entry-level business leadership program. And at first I thought, like, why the heck is LinkedIn, why is tech reaching out to me? Like, I thought I was going to go work on a political campaign or do something aligned in a nonprofit space. And one thing just led to another, and ended up having this amazing opportunity within LinkedIn where one of the executives, Scott Shute, led a weekly meditation class. And I started to attend this. And at this time, I wasn't really meditating, but I saw a similarity between the meditations that we were doing and the treatment that I used in order to get better from my back injury. And so it kind of like the seeds continuing to germinate. And a few years later, I took this workshop on building resilience and compassion in action in the workplace. And it was just one of those, like, Rusty, you ever have those moments where just something totally clicks and you're like, this is my jam. Like, that was one of those for me. It was just learning about the nervous system, about our flight or fight responses, and how our mind is wired to be negative, and that we can actually hack it, and we can do such amazing things. And it was kind of like this roadmap from taking my life from first gear into sixth gear. And at that point, that was really the connection between the back injury and the mindfulness piece. And I thought, okay, if I can, I want to be of service to people, and I want to help them heal. And I think I can do it in the same way that I healed from. And so that kind of started the journey of wanting to get into mindfulness. And at the time, I was working in the Ireland office. I spent a couple of years in San Francisco with LinkedIn, and then moved over to Ireland. And there was nobody really doing those same workshops and same meditations. And so I raised my hand and I was like, hey, I would love to be doing this. And it culminated in me running these workshops, on a regular basis, from 9 to 1 during the day. And then I would stay in the office until midnight and do the regular job. And I had so much passion for it. And so it was kind of this, to answer your question, it was this mix of following the energy and just kind of letting things unfold and making those conscious choices, right? Like when I saw a fork in the road and I had a lot of energy around it, I ended up taking it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many pieces in here, but one of the things I've appreciated about you, Alec, is that for a relatively young man in terms of ages, number of years on this planet, you've accumulated a lot of wisdom. And part of that is the difficult experiences, right? Of having to navigate something really difficult and search for an answer and search for a way through. And I think it's fascinating that, and I just saw a comment pop up here from Jeff saying, thank you for sharing your fork in the road, Alec. You're an inspiration. I'm glad to know you're well. So awesome. Thanks, Jeff, for chiming in. One of the things that I think is so interesting here is tuning into this, using your mind to heal your body, but beyond that, right? Using your mind to heal really your life, right? All of the maladies or the challenges in your life. And some of that is seeing things as a blessing in disguise, changing your perspective from this is happening to me to this is happening for me. This is here in the support of me. I'm sure all of those things have played a role, but I know a part of your journey is ultimately leaving LinkedIn. And it'd be great to hear what you're doing now, but also to share how did all of these pieces enable you to make that decision, right? Someone who's still relatively early in your career, You had a great job at a great company, tremendous opportunities, doing some amazing things, teaching as a compassion and mindfulness ambassador, right? So like a lot of really good things. And yet you said, I'm going to step away from that. So I'd love to hear, like, how do you make a decision like that to make that kind of change in your life?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're right. I had an amazing opportunity at LinkedIn. So I joined as an American studies major who, between us and the listeners, didn't know any Microsoft Excel. I ended up within about 8 months working on the pricing team, and teaching myself Excel and all of these things. And it was a fantastic opportunity that allowed me to travel the world. I got to tick off one of the items on my bucket list, which was work abroad in a foreign country. And I also knew in the back of my mind that eventually there would come a time where I would want to leave. That as amazing an experience pricing was, it wasn't the longer term career for me. And thankfully I had a really supportive manager who I had a lot of open conversations with. And it actually, being fully transparent, it took getting to a low point during the pandemic to realize that I needed to make a change. So a little bit of backstory on that. I decided to move back from Ireland to San Francisco, February 10th, 2020. So 3 weeks before the pandemic started. Is in a relationship with my current girlfriend. I'll spoil the ending. We're still together, but my girlfriend was still back in Ireland, and we thought, okay, we're going to see each other every few weeks. Or every few months. Like, this will be fine. The pandemic starts, and then we see each other in this long distance relationship. And the role that I had chosen to move back for was a growth program, a recruiting software growth program in the middle of a global pandemic and recession, right? So you can imagine how that went. And the other piece of this was wanting to do the mindfulness work. And when everything shifted to remote, there was this period where there wasn't much in terms of those offerings that I was able to do. And so I kind of regressed back into that mindset of life is happening to me, and was in a pretty unpleasant place in this long distance relationship where I couldn't see my girlfriend. The job was realizing it wasn't necessarily starting to still serving me in the same way. And at the beginning of 2021, last year, I came to this realization that something needed to change. And I had been for a few years now, like more and more interested in the mindfulness space, doing my own research on my own and getting into my own programs. And every step that I was taking, every small little step was telling me there's something really, really powerful here that was drawing me. And so I had this knowledge on the mindfulness side that, okay, this is what I want to be doing. And this kind of eventually, like, the amount of space would run out and it would be time to jump. And it just so happened that, there's I think of it as the head and the heart, right? So like the heart is saying, just go and do this. And then the head is like, well, let's make sure that, finances are in order. Let's make sure that this is going to actually work out, that you're going to land on your feet. And when I made my decision, it wasn't, taking just one of those. It was this combination, right, of the head and the heart. And eventually got to a point where, I was vaccinated. The team was changing, and it was a good time for me to step aside. And I also saw an opening for doing this mindfulness work. And so I said, you know what, this is, I think, as good a time as any. And ultimately, what am I going to regret more? Am I going to regret staying in this job that I know isn't for me in the immediate, in the long term? Or am I going to regret jumping and trying to follow my heart? I knew that the latter wasn't going to be something that I regretted.
Yep. Yeah. So many good pieces in there. One of the questions that came up for me as I was listening to you talk about that, Alec, is both, you described earlier, we started with this, the herniated disc or the ruptured disc and the pain that you had to navigate to get through that. And then in this latest chapter, you just described kind of a low point during the pandemic. And I'm curious, with where you are now, do you think pain is necessary to make a change in your life?
It's interesting. I think it's almost like the universe, or whatever you want to call it, kind of has a way of getting your attention, right? And you might have this feeling in your heart of, this is something that I want to do, or that's something I want to do, and you kind of brush it aside. And sometimes it takes life completely rearranging everything and really getting your attention through something like pain, which we can all relate to, in order to make that change. So while I think there are ways to, it doesn't have to be completely painful. However, I think all pain can carry a blessing, right? As challenging as that is, there are, any situation that I can think of or I've experienced, there is a silver lining. And so I do think that it's all about how we see it, right? If you're in the victim mindset of life happening to you, you're going to just see that pain as painful, right? It's just as it is. But if you can step outside and say, like, how is this pushing me to grow? How is this pushing me to become a better person, to become closer to my best self, then it's absolutely in service.
Yeah. That's great. I think it's all in your perspective, just as you said. So there's a great, I think there's a great takeaway in that, is just, always to think, and there actually reminds me of a quote by Napoleon Hill, who says, in every adversity and every heartache, there is always the seed of an equal or greater opportunity. But of course you have to look for it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, Alec, thank you so much for sharing your story, some of the lessons you've taken away. There's so much great stuff in here. And I think that when I listen to it, I'm just so reminded of, if you choose to make the most of every experience in your life, even the ones that are uncomfortable and the ones you wouldn't ever have opted for in the first place. But if you choose to make the most of that, there is so much that can come from it. And it can really lead you to a wonderful place. So thank you for sharing. What's the best place for people to get in touch with you? If they want to talk about back pain, or if they want to talk about meditation and mindfulness, or any of the things you've shared, how should they reach out to you?
Absolutely. And before I share that, just want to say thank you to you for having me on. This is such a fantastic opportunity. I love sharing a little bit about my experience. In terms of getting in touch with me, LinkedIn is a fantastic way. I'm on that pretty regularly. You can just search Alec Kassin and I'll show up there. And another way would be, you can send me an email at alec@scottshoot.com, and I'll just make a little plug for what I'm doing now. So Scott Shoot, who I mentioned earlier, is the former head of mindfulness and compassion for LinkedIn. And so I'm working with him and helping to run workshops and talk about mindfulness and help businesses and organizations change themselves from the inside out. So if you're interested in any of that, you can get a hold of me at alec@scottshoot.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alec. It was great to talk to you, and thanks for sharing your experience with everyone.
Thanks, Rusty. Take care.